At 8:44 a.m. on June 15, 1944, First Lieutenant Frank Tachovsky crouched in a Higgins boat 300 yards from Saipan's southern beaches as Japanese artillery shells exploded in the surf around him. The 29-year-old Marine officer from New Brighton, Pennsylvania, commanded 40 men behind him, every single one selected from the brig or punishment details, and their mission required them to work alone behind enemy lines for days at a time against an island garrison the intelligence estimated at 30,000 Japanese troops. Tachovsky's Scout Sniper Platoon had trained for 6 months at Camp Tarawa in Hawaii, but Saipan would be their first combat operation, and Marine Corps planners had already calculated that Scout Sniper casualties in the Pacific Theater averaged 73%. The platoon behind Tachovsky represented the Marine Corps' second experiment with elite reconnaissance units. After the bloody Battle of Tarawa 7 months earlier, Colonel James Risley of the 6th Marine Regiment had requested permission to form a specialized Scout Sniper platoon. The Marine Corps had lost 994 men at Tarawa in just 76 hours. Risley believed that better intelligence about Japanese fortifications could reduce those casualties. He needed men who could kill silently, map enemy positions, and survive alone in hostile territory. Standard Marine training produced excellent riflemen and assault troops, but Risley needed something different. He needed men who thought for themselves, who ignored rules, who fought dirty. He found them in the punishment details. Tachovsky had specific recruiting criteria. When 2 Marines got into a fight, the winner went to the brig, while the loser went to the infirmary. Tachovsky wanted the winner. A man with a disciplinary record for brawling had proven he could handle himself in close combat. The Marine Corps called such men troublemakers. Tachovsky called them survivors. Over 2 months at Camp Tarawa, he assembled 42 Marines from various punishment details across the 2nd Marine Division. The youngest was 17, the oldest was 34. Most had criminal records before joining the Marines. Several had been arrested for theft, assault, or fighting. One had been a professional boxer. Another had worked as a bodyguard for a Chicago gangster. The Marine Corps had given these men a choice: military prison or combat duty. They chose combat. Training at Camp Tarawa focused on skills the regular Marine Corps did not teach: silent killing techniques with knives and bare hands, how to approach a sentry from behind and break his neck without making sound, how to move through jungle terrain without disturbing vegetation, how to read Japanese maps and documents, how to call in naval gunfire and artillery strikes. The platoon practiced with M1903 Springfield rifles fitted with 8-power Untold scopes. They learned to shoot from 600 yards and hit a man-sized target. They trained with bazookas, learning to destroy tanks in fortified positions. They studied Japanese tactics, learning how the enemy defended islands and where they positioned troops. The platoon also learned to steal. Marines were notorious thieves, by necessity. The Marine Corps was the poorest equipped branch of the American military in 1944. Marines received surplus weapons from World War I, outdated equipment, and inadequate rations. To survive, they stole from better supplied Army and Navy units. Tachovsky's men excelled at theft. They raided Army supply depots for food, Navy warehouses for equipment, and even stole jeeps and trucks. Other Marines in the 6th Regiment nicknamed them the 40 Thieves. The name stuck. By June 1944, the 40 Thieves had completed their training. They knew how to fight, how to hide, and how to kill without making noise. They had memorized Japanese fortification patterns and studied aerial photographs of Saipan. They understood their mission: land with the first assault wave, push inland ahead of the main force, locate Japanese positions, and radio coordinates back to artillery and naval gunfire units. Then, disappear into the jungle and continue mapping enemy fortifications. Days at a time behind enemy lines. No support. No rescue if captured. The intelligence briefings had been clear about what awaited them. Saipan was the first Japanese territory the Americans would invade. The island was considered part of Japan itself, not occupied territory. The Japanese would defend it with suicidal determination. The garrison included 30,000 Imperial Army and Navy troops, plus thousands of armed civilians. The island measured 14 miles long and 5 miles wide. Mount Tapochau rose 1,500 feet in the center, providing the Japanese with observation posts overlooking every beach. The Japanese had built concrete pillboxes, interconnected trenches, and underground bunkers throughout the island. They had registered every beach and valley for artillery and mortar fire. American casualties were expected to exceed 50%. Want to know if Tachovsky's criminals survived what came next? Please hit that like button. It helps the algorithm show this story to more people. Subscribe for more untold history. Back to Tachovsky. The Higgins boat's ramp dropped into chest-deep water. Tachovsky led his men forward through the surf as machine gun fire kicked up spray around them. They reached the beach at 8:47 a.m. Japanese mortars began landing among the assault waves. Men died in the surf, in the sand, at the seawall. Tachovsky's platoon moved inland fast. Their orders were simple: keep moving, find the Japanese, radio their positions, stay alive. By 9:30 a.m. they had pushed 300 yards inland, farther than any other Marine unit on the beach. They found themselves alone in enemy territory, with 30,000 Japanese soldiers somewhere in the jungle ahead. Night would fall in 9 hours. That was when their real mission would begin. The 40 thieves moved through dense jungle growth 50 yards apart, maintaining visual contact through hand signals Tachovsky had developed during training. Standard Marine tactics called for units to stay together, advance in formation, and maintain radio contact with command. Tachovsky's orders were different. His platoon would operate independently, reporting enemy positions but making their own tactical decisions. No other Marine unit on Saipan had that authority. At 10:15 a.m., Sergeant Bill Knuppel spotted the first Japanese position. A concrete pillbox built into the side of a ridge, with interlocking fields of fire covering the valley below, where the 2nd Marine Division would advance later that afternoon. The pillbox housed a Type 92 heavy machine gun, with a crew of 7. The Japanese had camouflaged the position with vegetation and positioned it to remain invisible from the beach. Marine assault units advancing through the valley would walk directly into the kill zone. Tachovsky's map showed 3 possible routes for the Marine advance. The Japanese machine gun covered all 3. Taking out the position would save dozens, possibly hundreds of Marine lives, but attacking it would reveal the 40 thieves' position and compromise their reconnaissance mission. Tachovsky made the decision in 30 seconds. The platoon had carried a bazooka specifically for situations like this. Private Marvin Strombo positioned himself 80 yards from the pillbox, while the rest of the platoon provided security. At 10:32 a.m., Strombo fired 1 round. The rocket hit the pillbox's firing slit and detonated inside. The explosion killed the entire Japanese crew instantly. Before the smoke cleared, Tachovsky's platoon had already moved 300 yards deeper into the jungle. They left no trace of their presence except the destroyed pillbox. When 2nd Marine Division units advanced through the valley 4 hours later, they encountered no machine gun fire from that ridge. By noon, the 40 thieves had identified and mapped 17 Japanese positions, 8 machine gun nests, 4 mortar pits, 3 artillery observation posts, and 2 ammunition storage areas. Tachovsky radioed the coordinates back to regimental headquarters using encoded transmission protocols. Within 20 minutes, naval gunfire from destroyers offshore began hitting the targets. The 40 thieves watched from concealed positions as 5-inch shells demolished Japanese fortifications they had marked 30 minutes earlier. This was their mission: find the enemy, mark them for destruction, and move on, before the Japanese realized what was happening. The platoon's advance carried them 2 miles inland by early afternoon, well ahead of any other American unit. They moved through terrain the Marines would not reach for 3 more days. Every 100 yards revealed new Japanese positions. The island was more heavily fortified than intelligence had estimated. Tachovsky counted over 200 enemy soldiers in one valley alone, dug into positions that would take days of frontal assault to capture. But with accurate coordinates, naval gunfire could destroy those positions in minutes. The 40 thieves were changing how the Marine Corps fought. At 3:40 p.m., the platoon discovered something unexpected: a Japanese tank battalion staging area. 37 Type 97 medium tanks sat under camouflage netting in a grove north of Sharon Kanoa. Marine intelligence had estimated the Japanese possessed maybe a dozen tanks on Saipan. The 40 thieves had just found 3 times that number in one location. The tanks represented the most serious threat to the American beachhead. Japanese doctrine called for massed tank attacks at night, when American naval gunfire would be less effective. If these 37 tanks attacked the beach after dark, they could potentially break through Marine lines and reach the vulnerable supply areas. Tachovsky immediately radioed the coordinates. The response from headquarters came back within 8 minutes. Naval gunfire was already engaged supporting Marine units pinned down near the beach. Airstrikes were committed to other targets. Artillery was still being unloaded from ships. No assets were available to hit the tank battalion for at least 4 hours. By then it would be dark, and the tanks would likely have moved. Tachovsky looked at the 37 tanks and made a calculation. His platoon carried 6 bazookas, 6 rounds per bazooka, 36 rockets total, 37 tanks. The math was almost perfect. The decision violated every tactical principle the Marine Corps taught. A 40-man unit does not attack a tank battalion. But Tachovsky had not recruited Marines who followed principles. He had recruited men who fought dirty and survived. At 4:15 p.m., he gave the order to prepare for assault. The 40 thieves would attack the tank battalion themselves. If they succeeded, they would prevent a potential disaster at the beachhead. If they failed, 40 men would die, and no one would ever know what happened to them in that jungle grove. Strombo checked his bazooka and counted his rockets. 6 shots to kill 6 tanks. Then it would come down to close combat. Tachovsky positioned his 6 bazooka teams in a semicircle around the tank staging area, spacing them 40 yards apart to maximize coverage. Each team consisted of a shooter and a loader. The plan was simple. Hit as many tanks as possible in the first 30 seconds, then withdraw into the jungle before Japanese infantry could respond. The Marines knew they would not destroy all 37 tanks, but even disabling 10 or 15 would significantly reduce the threat to the beachhead. At 4:25 p.m., as the teams moved into position, something changed. The Japanese tanks started their engines. The sound of 37 diesel engines roaring to life simultaneously echoed through the jungle. Japanese tank crews emerged from camouflaged dugouts and climbed onto their vehicles. Officers shouted orders. Infantry units began forming up around the tanks. This was not a repositioning movement. This was preparation for attack. Tachovsky checked his watch. 4:28 p.m. Sunset was at 7:12 p.m. The Japanese were preparing for a dusk assault, earlier than Marine intelligence had predicted. The entire enemy force was now alert and organizing for combat. The window for a surprise attack had closed. Tachovsky made a new decision. His platoon would shadow the tank battalion and report its movements. Attacking now would accomplish nothing except getting his men killed. But tracking the tanks and providing real-time coordinates would allow Marine units at the beach to prepare defenses. He radioed headquarters with updated information. Enemy tank battalion mobilizing for attack. Estimated time of arrival at American lines between 7 and 8 p.m. The response came back immediately. Maintain observation. Do not engage. Continue reporting. The tank battalion began moving at 5:07 p.m. They advanced in 2 columns along parallel routes toward the coast. Japanese infantry units moved alongside the tanks, approximately 1,000 soldiers total. This was a major assault, not a probing attack. The Japanese intended to break through Marine lines and reach the beaches before nightfall. If they succeeded, they could destroy supply dumps, artillery positions, and command posts. The entire American invasion could collapse in a single evening. The 40 thieves followed the enemy formation, staying 200 yards to the flank and using jungle cover for concealment. Every 10 minutes, Tachovsky radioed updated coordinates showing the enemy's position and direction of movement. Marine units at the beach began repositioning to meet the threat. Bazookas were distributed to frontline units. Sherman tanks from the 2nd Marine Tank Battalion moved forward. Artillery batteries adjusted their aim points. The entire 2nd Marine Division prepared to receive a massed tank attack. At 6:15 p.m., approximately 1 mile from the beach, the Japanese formation halted. Officers gathered for a conference. Tachovsky observed them through binoculars from 300 yards away. The Japanese were arguing about something. One officer pointed toward the coast. Another gestured toward the north. A third officer unrolled the map. The conference lasted 11 minutes. Finally, the officers returned to their units and the formation changed direction. Instead of continuing straight toward the beach, the tanks turned north. The maneuver surprised Tachovsky. Marine intelligence maps showed no valuable targets in that direction. The area was mostly jungle and rough terrain. But the Japanese clearly had a specific objective. The formation advanced another mile north, then turned west again toward the coast. By 7:05 p.m., as the sun touched the horizon, Tachovsky understood their plan. The Japanese were not attacking the main beachhead. They were targeting the gap between the 2nd Marine Division and 4th Marine Division. A successful breakthrough there would split the American forces in half. Tachovsky radioed the warning, but the Japanese had chosen their timing perfectly. Dusk was falling. Radio communication became difficult as Marine units shifted frequencies for night operations. Artillery batteries were in the middle of ammunition resupply. Sherman tanks were refueling. The gap between divisions was defended by just 2 Marine companies, approximately 340 men, against 37 tanks and 1,000 Japanese infantry. At 7:23 p.m., the Japanese attack began. The 40 Thieves watched from elevated ground as enemy tanks rolled forward through the twilight. Marine defensive positions erupted with bazooka fire. The first 3 Japanese tanks exploded in flames, but 34 more kept coming. Japanese infantry charged behind the tanks, screaming and firing. Marines fell back from their initial positions. The Japanese breakthrough was succeeding. Within 15 minutes, enemy tanks would reach the beach. Tachovsky looked at his 6 bazookas and the 34 tanks below. Then he saw something that changed everything. One Japanese tank had separated from the main formation and was heading directly toward the 6th Marine Regiment's command post, where Colonel Risley was coordinating the entire divisional response. The Type 97 tank moved through the darkness at approximately 15 miles per hour, following a ravine that led directly to the command post location. The Japanese tank commander had identified a weakness in Marine defenses, a 200-yard gap where jungle terrain prevented easy positioning of anti-tank weapons. If the tank reached the command post, it could destroy radio equipment, kill senior officers, and paralyze the entire regimental response to the main attack. Colonel Risley and his staff were approximately 400 yards away, completely unaware of the approaching threat. Tachovsky had maybe 3 minutes to act. He grabbed Private Herbert Hodges, the best bazooka shooter in the platoon. Hodges had destroyed 6 targets during training at Camp Tarawa without missing a single shot. But training targets did not move, did not shoot back, and did not have armor plating designed to deflect rockets. The Type 97's frontal armor was 50 millimeters thick, enough to potentially deflect a bazooka round fired at the wrong angle. Hodges would need a perfect side shot to guarantee penetration. Tachovsky and Hodges moved down the slope at a dead run, racing to intercept the tank before it reached the command post. They reached a position 30 yards from the tank's projected path at 7:31 p.m. Hodges dropped prone and aimed the bazooka. The tank emerged from the ravine 20 seconds later. Its turret was rotating, searching for targets. The commander stood in the open hatch, scanning the darkness with binoculars. Hodges waited. A moving tank was harder to hit than a stationary one. He needed the perfect moment. The tank continued forward. 25 yards. 20 yards. 15 yards. Then it stopped. The engine idled. The commander was checking his map, trying to confirm his position. Hodges fired at 7:32 p.m. The rocket hit the tank's left side just below the turret ring, exactly where the armor was thinnest. The shaped charge penetrated and detonated inside the crew compartment. The explosion killed all 4 crew members instantly. The tank's ammunition cooked off 6 seconds later, and the entire vehicle erupted in flames. The fireball lit up the jungle for 300 yards in every direction. Japanese infantry advancing nearby saw the explosion and assumed they had encountered a major Marine defensive position. They redirected their assault away from the command post and toward what they thought was a larger threat. Tachovsky's bazooka shot had accomplished more than destroying one tank. It had inadvertently misdirected an entire Japanese infantry battalion away from the most vulnerable point in Marine defenses. The command post remained secure. Colonel Risley continued coordinating the divisional response without interruption. But the bazooka's muzzle flash had revealed Tachovsky's position to every Japanese soldier within 500 yards. Enemy machine gun fire began raking the area where the 40 Thieves were positioned. Mortar rounds started falling. The platoon had to withdraw immediately or risk being overrun. The withdrawal through jungle in darkness while under fire tested everything the 40 Thieves had trained for. Standard procedure called for units to stay together and move as a group. But jungle terrain and enemy fire made that impossible. The platoon split into small teams of 4 or 5 men each, moving independently toward predetermined rally points. Japanese patrols were everywhere, searching for the Marines who had destroyed their tank. Several times, 40 Thieves teams found themselves within yards of enemy soldiers. They relied on silent movement and concealment rather than engaging. One firefight would reveal their position and bring overwhelming enemy response. Private Strombo's team encountered a Japanese patrol at 8:05 p.m. 7 enemy soldiers moving through the jungle, searching with flashlights. Strombo and 3 other Marines lay motionless in undergrowth as the patrol passed within 10 feet of their position. One Japanese soldier stopped and looked directly at the spot where Strombo was hiding. The Marine held his breath. The Japanese soldier stood there for 43 seconds, staring into the darkness. Finally, he moved on. The patrol continued past without detecting the Americans. By 9 p.m., approximately half the 40 Thieves had reached the primary rally point, a small clearing 600 yards behind Marine lines. Tachovsky counted 23 men. 17 were still missing. They could be dead, captured, or simply lost in the darkness. Standard Marine procedure called for units to wait at rally points for up to 2 hours for missing personnel, but the rally point was too close to Japanese positions. Enemy patrols were actively searching the area. Tachovsky made the decision to move the assembled group back to Marine lines and send small rescue teams to search for the missing men after dawn. The group moved toward friendly positions at 9:17 p.m. They approached Marine lines carefully, knowing that nervous sentries often shot at anything moving in darkness. Tachovsky used the prearranged recognition signal, 3 short whistles followed by 2 long ones. Marine sentries challenged them. Tachovsky responded with the correct password. The 40 Thieves crossed into friendly territory at 9:41 p.m. 23 men had made it back. 17 were still out there somewhere in the dark. The Japanese tank attack continued through the night. Marine defensive positions along the beach reported enemy armor probing their lines until 3:14 a.m. American bazookas destroyed 11 tanks. Sherman tanks from the 2nd Marine Tank Battalion knocked out 9 more. Artillery fire disabled another 7. By dawn on June 16th, the Japanese had lost 27 of their 37 tanks. The attack had failed, but it had cost the Marines heavily. The 2nd Battalion's 6th Marines reported 78 casualties. Company F of the 2nd Marines had 19 killed or wounded. The gap between divisions had held, but barely. Tachovsky assembled search teams at first light. Each team consisted of 4 men, with orders to locate the missing 17 Marines and return by noon. The teams moved back into the jungle at 6:30 a.m., retracing the platoon's route from the previous evening. They found the first body at 7:05 a.m. Private Donald Evans had been shot twice in the chest, probably during the withdrawal under fire. He had died instantly. His dog tags were missing. The Japanese often collected American dog tags as trophies. The team buried Evans in a shallow grave, marked with his rifle and helmet. The second team found 3 more bodies at 8:20 a.m. These Marines had been captured, alive, then executed. Their hands were tied behind their backs. They had been bayoneted. Japanese forces on Saipan rarely took prisoners. The Imperial Army considered surrender dishonorable, and extended that contempt to enemy soldiers who surrendered. But these 3 Marines had not surrendered. They had been wounded, captured, and murdered. The search team reported the discovery to Tachovsky by radio. He ordered them to continue searching for the remaining 13 missing men. By 10 a.m., search teams had located 6 of the missing Marines alive. They had become separated during the night withdrawal, but had successfully evaded Japanese patrols and reached Marine lines at different locations. That brought the count to 29 men accounted for. 13 were still missing. At 11:15 a.m., one of the search teams made radio contact. They had found 5 more Marines hiding in a cave system, approximately 1 mile behind Japanese lines. The Marines were alive, but pinned down by enemy patrols. They could not move without being detected. Tachovsky faced another decision. He could request artillery support to create a diversion, allowing the trapped Marines to escape. But artillery fire would alert the Japanese to American interest in that specific location, potentially leading to increased patrols and making future rescue attempts impossible. Or he could send a rescue team immediately, relying on stealth and speed to extract the trapped men before Japanese forces could respond. The first option was safer but slower. The second option was faster but riskier. Tachovsky chose speed. He assembled a 6-man rescue team and moved out at 11:47 a.m. The team reached the cave system at 12:33 p.m. The 5 trapped Marines were exhausted and dehydrated, but uninjured. They had spent the night listening to Japanese patrols pass within yards of their hiding position. One Marine had malaria and was running a fever of 103 degrees. Another had dysentery and could barely walk. The rescue team distributed water and medical supplies, then prepared to move. The extraction required the team to cover 1 mile through Japanese-controlled territory in broad daylight. Standard Marine tactics called for moving in darkness, but the trapped Marines could not survive another 12 hours without medical attention. The fever case needed immediate evacuation. The dysentery case was severely dehydrated. Tachovsky decided to move immediately and rely on speed rather than concealment. The combined group of 11 Marines began moving toward friendly lines at 1:05 p.m. They made it 400 yards before encountering a Japanese patrol. 20 enemy soldiers moving through the jungle in a standard search formation. The Marines had 2 choices: hide and hope the patrol passed without detecting them, or ambush the patrol and eliminate the threat. Hiding risked discovery. Ambushing risked bringing more Japanese troops to investigate gunfire. Tachovsky chose ambush. The element of surprise would give the Marines a brief advantage. If they could eliminate the entire patrol in 30 seconds before anyone could fire a shot or radio for help, they might escape undetected. The Marines positioned themselves in a classic L-shaped ambush formation. 8 men along the patrol's line of march, 3 men at the end of the L to catch anyone who tried to escape. The Japanese walked directly into the kill zone at 1:23 p.m. Tachovsky gave the signal. 11 Marines opened fire simultaneously. The Japanese patrol was destroyed in 7 seconds. 20 enemy soldiers killed. No survivors. No radio transmissions. But the gunfire had been heard for at least half a mile in every direction. Japanese units throughout the area would be converging on this location within minutes. The Marines moved at a full run, abandoning stealth for speed. Behind them, Japanese voices shouted commands, whistles blew. The sound of enemy units mobilizing echoed through the jungle. Tachovsky estimated they had maybe 5 minutes before Japanese forces surrounded them. The nearest Marine defensive position was 800 yards away across open ground that offered minimal cover. Running that distance while carrying 2 sick Marines would take at least 12 minutes. The mathematics were clear. The Japanese would catch them before they reached safety. At 1:29 p.m., the Marines encountered an unexpected problem. The terrain ahead dropped into a steep ravine 40 feet deep with near vertical sides. Going around would add 15 minutes to their route. Going down and back up would slow them significantly. But staying on the ridge meant certain contact with pursuing Japanese forces. Tachovsky chose the ravine. The Marines descended the slope, half sliding and half climbing, supporting the 2 sick men between them. They reached the bottom at 1:33 p.m. Japanese soldiers appeared on the ridge above them 60 seconds later. The Japanese opened fire from elevated positions, shooting down into the ravine. Bullets ricocheted off rocks. 1 Marine was hit in the leg. Another took shrapnel from a grenade that exploded on the ravine floor. The Marines returned fire while continuing to move, using boulders and vegetation for cover. The ravine channeled them in one direction, eliminating tactical options. They could only move forward and hope to reach the far end before the Japanese descended and engaged them at close range. At 1:38 p.m., they spotted the problem. The ravine ended in a box canyon. No exit. The Marines were trapped. Japanese soldiers began descending into the ravine from multiple points, moving to surround the trapped Americans. Tachovsky counted at least 40 enemy soldiers visible, with more arriving every minute. His 11 Marines had maybe 200 rounds of ammunition total between them. The 2 sick Marines could not fight effectively. That left 9 combat-effective men against a force that was growing rapidly. Artillery support was impossible because the Marines were too close to Japanese positions. Airstrikes could not be called in without risking hitting friendly forces. The 40 thieves were on their own. Tachovsky noticed something the Japanese had missed. The box canyon's rear wall was not solid rock. Vegetation growing at the base suggested water seepage, which meant a crack or fissure in the stone. He sent 2 Marines to investigate, while the rest of the team established defensive positions. The 2 Marines reported back at 1:44 p.m. There was a narrow opening behind the vegetation, barely wide enough for a man to squeeze through. Beyond the opening, the fissure widened into a passageway that appeared to lead upward through the rock. The Marines began moving through the opening one at a time, pushing the two sick men through first. The passage was tight enough that men had to remove their packs and drag them behind. It was completely dark inside. They moved by touch, following the Marine ahead. The passage climbed steeply upward through solid rock. Behind them, they could hear Japanese soldiers entering the box canyon, calling to each other as they searched for the Americans who had seemingly disappeared. The passage emerged onto the opposite side of the ridge at 2:07 p.m., 400 yards from where they had entered. The Marines found themselves behind Japanese lines, but with the enemy focused on searching the ravine below. They moved quickly toward Marine positions, covering the final 600 yards in 8 minutes. They approached friendly lines using proper recognition signals and crossed into American-held territory at 2:23 p.m. All 11 Marines reached safety. The two sick men were immediately evacuated to medical stations. That brought the total count to 34 Marines accounted for. 8 remained missing. As the day progressed, 3 more were found alive, having successfully evaded capture and reached Marine lines independently. 2 more bodies were discovered by advancing Marine units. That left 3 Marines still unaccounted for by nightfall on June 16th. They were officially listed as missing in action. The 40 thieves had lost at least 6 men killed in their first 48 hours on Saipan. Another 3 were missing and presumed dead. That represented a 22% casualty rate. Despite the losses, the platoon had accomplished its mission. They had identified over 200 Japanese positions, called in coordinates that destroyed dozens of enemy fortifications, prevented a tank from reaching the regimental command post, and provided critical intelligence on enemy movements. Colonel Risley sent a message to Tachovsky at 1800 hours. The 40 thieves would have 1 night to rest, resupply, and integrate replacements. At dawn on June 17th, they would return to the jungle. This time, their mission would take them even deeper behind enemy lines. The Japanese garrison on Saipan still numbered approximately 29,000 troops. The 40 thieves now numbered 37 men. At 0530 hours on June 17th, the 40 thieves moved out from Marine lines in complete darkness. Their objective was a ridge system 3 miles inland that Marine intelligence believed contained Japanese artillery positions. Those guns had been shelling American positions continuously for 2 days, killing dozens of Marines and disrupting supply operations. Aerial reconnaissance could not locate the guns because the Japanese had camouflaged them inside caves. Only ground reconnaissance could find them. The mission required the 40 thieves to penetrate deeper behind enemy lines than any American unit had yet gone on Saipan. The platoon moved in complete silence, using hand signals for communication. They covered the first mile in 47 minutes without encountering Japanese patrols. The second mile took longer because the terrain became increasingly difficult. Steep slopes, dense vegetation, and rocky ground slowed their advance. They reached the target ridge system at 0815 hours and began systematic reconnaissance. The ridge stretched for approximately 2 miles and rose 600 feet above the surrounding jungle. Japanese positions were everywhere. Tachovsky counted 8 cave entrances large enough to hide artillery pieces. The caves were connected by tunnels that allowed the Japanese to move guns between positions, fire several rounds, then relocate before American counter-battery fire could respond. This explained why Marine artillery had failed to destroy the enemy guns. They were shooting at positions the Japanese had already abandoned. Finding the guns was only part of the mission. The 40 thieves also needed to map the tunnel system, so Marine assault units would know how to attack when they reached this area. Mapping the tunnels required entering them. At 0940 hours, Corporal Roscoe Mullins and Private Strombo volunteered to penetrate the cave system, while the rest of the platoon provided security outside. The 2 Marines entered the largest cave opening and moved into darkness, using small flashlights shielded to prevent light from being visible more than a few feet away. The cave extended 200 feet into the ridge before branching into multiple passages. They could hear Japanese voices echoing from somewhere deeper in the system. Water dripped from the ceiling. The air smelled of gunpowder and human waste. They found the first artillery piece at 01012 hours, A Type 91 105mm howitzer, positioned 30 feet inside a side passage, with ammunition stored in recesses carved into the rock walls. The gun crew was absent, probably sleeping in a different section of the cave system. Mullins and Strombo marked the location on their map and continued deeper. They discovered 2 more guns in the next 40 minutes, plus a command post, an ammunition magazine containing approximately 2,000 rounds, and sleeping quarters for at least 60 soldiers. The tunnel system was far more extensive than intelligence had estimated. At 11:03 hours, they heard Japanese soldiers approaching. Mullins and Strombo had maybe 15 seconds to find concealment before being discovered. They pressed themselves into a small alcove and remained motionless as a dozen enemy soldiers walked past, conversing in Japanese. The soldiers passed within 3 feet without detecting the Americans. After the patrol moved on, the 2 Marines decided to exit the cave system. They had gathered enough intelligence. Staying longer risked capture or discovery. They emerged at 11:27 hours and rejoined the platoon. Tachovsky examined their map. The tunnel system connected all 8 cave entrances and contained at least 6 artillery pieces, possibly more. Standard Marine assault tactics would fail against this position. Infantry could not storm the caves because machine guns covered every entrance. Artillery fire would be ineffective because the caves were too deep. The only solution was to seal the entrances, trapping the Japanese inside, then systematically destroy each sealed position with demolitions. But that required Marine engineers with explosives, and those units were still days away from reaching this area. At 12:15 hours, the platoon began moving toward their secondary objective, the town of Garrison, Saipan's administrative capital before the war. Marine intelligence wanted to know if Japanese forces were defending the town or if they had withdrawn to more defensible positions inland. Reaching Garrison required crossing 4 miles of enemy-controlled territory in broad daylight, but the 40 thieves had successfully operated undetected for over 30 hours. Tachovsky believed they could complete 1 more reconnaissance mission before withdrawing to Marine lines. They approached Garrison from the east at 15:40 hours. The town had been heavily bombed by American aircraft and shelled by naval gunfire. Most buildings were destroyed or damaged, but the 40 thieves could see Japanese soldiers moving through the ruins, indicating the enemy still maintained a presence. Tachovsky needed closer reconnaissance to determine enemy strength and positions. At 16:05 hours, he made a decision that would become legendary in Marine Corps history. 5 Marines would enter Garrison in broad daylight, conduct reconnaissance, and return with intelligence. The mission was virtually suicidal, but it was also exactly the kind of operation the 40 thieves had been created to perform. Tachovsky selected 4 Marines for the Garrison reconnaissance: Strombo, Mullins, Corporal Ira Causey, and Private Don Evans. 5 men total, including himself. They removed all equipment that might make noise: canteens, extra ammunition, grenades. They carried only rifles, knives, and sidearms. At 16:23 hours, they moved toward Garrison's eastern edge. The ruins provided excellent cover, but also concealed Japanese positions. Every destroyed building could hide enemy soldiers. Every pile of rubble could be a defensive position. They entered the town at 16:41 hours, moving through back streets and staying in shadows. Japanese soldiers were everywhere. The Marines counted at least 200 enemy troops visible in the town center, with probably hundreds more in surrounding buildings. The Japanese were not defending Garrison as a fortified position. They were using it as a staging area for counterattacks against American forces. The distinction was important. Marine commanders planning to assault Garrison needed to know they would face mobile enemy units rather than fixed fortifications. At 17:08 hours, Causey spotted something unexpected: 5 bicycles leaning against a partially destroyed building. Japanese military bicycles, the type officers used for transportation between positions. An idea formed immediately: 5 bicycles, 5 Marines. They could conduct their reconnaissance while riding through town like Japanese soldiers moving between positions. In the chaos and destruction of Garrison, 5 men on bicycles would attract less attention than 5 men on foot trying to hide. The plan was audacious and completely violated standard reconnaissance procedures. Tachovsky approved it instantly. The Marines took the bicycles and began riding through Garrison at 17:15 hours. They moved casually, not trying to hide, just 5 soldiers on bicycles navigating through ruins. Japanese troops ignored them. Some waved, Others shouted greetings in Japanese that the Marines did not understand, but acknowledged with hand gestures. For 43 minutes, the 40 thieves rode through the enemy capital, mapping positions, counting troops, and identifying supply dumps. They passed within yards of Japanese officers who never suspected the Americans riding bicycles were enemy reconnaissance. At 17:58 hours, they completed their circuit through Garapan and exited the town heading north. They continued riding the bicycles for another mile before abandoning them and moving back into the jungle. The reconnaissance had provided detailed intelligence on enemy dispositions throughout Garapan. Marine commanders would now know exactly where Japanese forces were concentrated when they eventually assaulted the town. The 40 thieves reached Marine lines at 19:32 hours. They had been behind enemy lines for 14 hours and had penetrated deeper into Japanese territory than any other American unit. Over the next 3 weeks, the 40 thieves continued similar missions. They mapped enemy positions throughout Saipan's interior, called in coordinates for artillery strikes, ambushed Japanese patrols, and provided intelligence that saved countless Marine lives. They witnessed Japanese atrocities, civilians forced to jump from cliffs rather than surrender, wounded Marines used as bait for ambushes, prisoners executed. The platoon operated in small teams, sometimes for days without contact with Marine units. They suffered from malaria, dysentery, heat exhaustion, and tropical diseases. They ran out of food and stole from Japanese supply dumps. They ran out of water and drank from contaminated streams. By July 9th, when Saipan was declared secure, the 40 thieves had lost 12 men killed and 9 wounded. That represented a 56% casualty rate, below the 73% average for scout sniper units, but still devastating. The survivors were physically and mentally exhausted. Most had lost 30 to 40 pounds. Several had malaria fevers. All had seen things that would haunt them for the rest of their lives, but they had accomplished their mission. Marine commanders estimated the 40 thieves' reconnaissance work had reduced overall Marine casualties by at least 15%, potentially saving 2,000 lives. The platoon would go on to fight at Tinian in July 1944, then return to Saipan for mopping up operations. After the war, most members struggled with what would later be recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder. Many had recurring nightmares. Some turned to alcohol. Several could not maintain civilian employment or personal relationships. The psychological cost of their service was never officially recognized or treated. Frank Tachovsky returned to civilian life and became mayor of Sturgeon Bay, Wisconsin. He never spoke about the war. His son, Joseph, only learned about the 40 thieves after finding his father's footlocker following his death in 2011. The story of the platoon that had changed Marine Corps tactics remained largely unknown for 66 years. The Scout Sniper Platoon of the 6th Marine Regiment was one of the first elite special operations units in American military history. Their tactics of deep reconnaissance, silent killing, and independent operations behind enemy lines would influence the development of modern Special Forces units, including Navy SEALs and Marine Force reconnaissance. They proved that small, highly trained units could accomplish missions that entire battalions could not. 40 men recruited from brigs and punishment details became one of the most effective combat units in the Pacific War. The Marines who called them criminals were wrong. They were warriors. If Lieutenant Tachovsky's story moved you, please hit that like button. It helps YouTube show these forgotten stories to more people who need to hear them. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications.
We publish new Untold history stories every day, and you won't want to miss them. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you're watching from. Are you in the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, or somewhere else? Our community stretches across the world. You're part of keeping these memories alive. Tell us in the comments, did any of your relatives serve in World War II, especially in the Pacific Theater? Thank you for watching. Frank Tachovsky and his 40 thieves deserve to be remembered. These men sacrificed everything so future generations could live in freedom. You're helping make that happen by watching, liking, and sharing these stories. Never forget,